Hello, curious minds, and welcome to this new intellectual journey. Today, we're going to explore an idea that could change the way you understand your own inner voice, that voice that tells you what's right and what's wrong. Get ready, because we're about to unearth an ancient secret that lives on inside each and every one of us. Have you ever really wondered where your conscience comes from? What if I told you that the deepest rules guiding your morality aren't entirely yours? What if I told you they're the echo of a battle of ideas that began over 4,000 years ago in the deserts of the ancient Near East? Sounds incredible, right? Well, join me, because today we're going to decode the two major forces that shaped our moral compass. On one side, the rigid legal codes of Mesopotamia. On the other, the revolutionary voice of conscience that emerged from ancient Israel. This clash of worlds is the secret origin of your sense of justice. Before we dive in, I wanted to tell you a little about the visuals you'll be seeing. To bring this narrative to life, I've used artificial intelligence tools to generate the images. So think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of what I'm telling you. They won't always be an exact or literal representation, but rather a visual accompaniment to help you let your imagination soar with me. I sincerely hope you enjoy it. Our journey begins in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, in cities like Babylon, life was complex, bustling, and often chaotic. To establish order, they needed more than just brute force. They needed clear written rules. Imagine a world without written laws, a place where justice depended on the whim of a king or the strongest individual. The Mesopotamians were among the first to say, "Enough is enough." They understood that for a society to thrive, rules had to be known by everyone and applied consistently. A truly revolutionary idea. And so legal codes were born. The most famous of them all is, of course, the Code of Hammurabi, but it wasn't the only one. Before him, other kings like Ur-Nammu had already created lists of laws to govern their people. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was humanity's first major attempt to create a just and predictable society. Let's consider the Code of Hammurabi. It's not just a list of punishments, it's a fascinating portrait of their society. Carved onto an imposing stone stele, visible to all, King Hammurabi is depicted receiving the laws from the sun god, Shamash, the god of justice. The message was clear. These aren't my rules, they are divine laws. Many people reduce it to the famous law of retaliation, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And yes, that part exists, but it's a simplification. That law, which today seems brutal to us, was an advancement in its time. It limited revenge. You couldn't kill an entire family for an eye. Retribution had to be proportionate to the crime, but the code went far beyond that. It regulated commercial contracts, wage prices, inheritances, and even medical malpractice. If an architect built a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the architect was executed. It was a system that demanded accountability and quality in work. The fundamental aspect of Mesopotamian morality was its exteriority. Good and evil were not a matter of intention or conscience. They were a matter of public action and consequence. What mattered was what you did and how it affected social order, not what you felt or thought internally. If you followed the law, you were a good person. If you broke it, you were bad. There were no shades of gray. Morality was a visible and tangible social contract etched in stone. Your worth as an individual was measured by your conformity to the code. A clear system, but also rigid and without room for compassion or repentance. However, this isn't the whole story of Mesopotamian wisdom. Alongside the laws of kings, there was another current of thought, more personal and everyday. I'm referring to wisdom literature, that is, the proverbs and advice passed down from generation to generation. If laws were society's operating system, proverbs were the apps for daily life. They were small fragments of wisdom, the ancient equivalent of today's tweets or memes designed to be remembered and shared. Archaeologists have found thousands of tablets containing these practical gems of wisdom. Listen to this Sumerian proverb, "Friendship lasts a day, kinship lasts forever." Or this one, "He who eats too much cannot sleep." They sound surprisingly modern, don't they? They don't speak of gods or kings. They speak of universal human experience, of the small truths we still recognize today. These proverbs show us a deeper layer of the Mesopotamian mindset. They reveal a concern for character, prudence, and good reputation. One Babylonian piece of advice warned, "Do not marry a harlot whose husband is the entire world." It's practical advice based on observation of human behavior. Here, morality is no longer just about obeying the law. It's also about being wise, prudent, and respected in your community. It's about understanding how the world works and acting accordingly to live a good life. It's a pragmatic morality, focused on personal success and well-being within society. So in Mesopotamia, we have two levels, an external and divine legal system that ensures order, and an internal practical folk wisdom that seeks individual well-being. But in both cases, the primary motivation is external, whether it's fear of the king's punishment or the desire for social approval. Now let's leave the great cities of Mesopotamia and travel to a very different landscape, the hills and deserts of Canaan, the homeland of the ancient people of Israel. Here, in a more austere and tribal setting, a radically new idea about good and evil was about to be born. The great revolution in Israelite thought was the idea of a single God, Yahweh, who was not a local deity tied to a city or an empire, but the creator of the entire universe. And this God didn't just demand rituals and sacrifices, he demanded something far more personal, a relationship, a covenant. This relationship was formalized in a covenant, known as the Sinai Covenant. According to the biblical account, God gives Moses not just a code of laws, but the 10 Commandments. And this is where everything changes. Because these aren't mere decrees from a king, they are the terms of a personal relationship between a people and their God. Let's compare the 10 Commandments with the Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi's code has nearly 300 laws covering very specific cases. If a man steals an ox, he shall pay 30 times its value. It's detailed and transactional. It focuses on the what and the how. The 10 Commandments, on the other hand, are broad and fundamental principles. You shall not steal. You shall not murder. They don't specify the punishment or all possible scenarios. They focus on the fundamental moral principle. They are a declaration of values, not a legal procedure manual. But the biggest difference is the source of moral obligation. In Babylon, you obeyed the law to avoid the king's punishment and maintain social order. In Israel, you obeyed the law because it was an expression of your loyalty and love for God. The motivation shifts from external to internal. And this leads us to a revolutionary concept, sin. In Mesopotamia, you committed a crime, an offense against society. In Israel, by breaking the law, you not only committed a crime, but also committed a sin, an offense that damaged your personal relationship with the divine. This completely changes the moral landscape. It's no longer enough just to avoid getting caught. God, being omniscient, knows your actions, but also your thoughts and intentions. Morality is no longer a public act, it becomes a state of the heart. The idea of conscience is born. The prophets of Israel took this idea even further. Figures like Amos, Isaiah, or Jeremiah constantly reminded the people that rituals and sacrifices meant nothing if they weren't accompanied by social justice and inner righteousness. It was a radical message. Listen to the words of the prophet Micah. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Notice the verbs, act, love, walk humbly. Morality is an action, an emotion, and an attitude. It is integral. Here, goodness is not defined by the absence of bad actions, but by the active presence of compassion and justice. It's not enough not to steal, you must help the poor. It's not enough not to lie, you must seek the truth. It's a demanding morality because it asks you to get involved, to care. In summary, the wisdom of Israel internalizes morality. It transforms it into a constant conversation between the individual, their community, and God. Good and evil are no longer carved only in stone. They must be etched into the heart of each person. This is the birthplace of Western conscience. So here we have the two models. The Mesopotamian model, based on external law, social order, and reputation. And the Israelite model, based on internal covenant, the intention of the heart, and personal conscience. Two ways of understanding morality that at first glance seem opposite. But here comes the twist, the most revealing insight. They are not opposites. They are the two halves that form our own, often conflicting moral compass. We haven't chosen one over the other. We've inherited both, and their tension is what defines our modern struggle with good and evil. Think about it for a moment. On one hand, we live in a society that relies on the Mesopotamian model. We obey traffic laws, sign contracts, and pay taxes not just out of conviction, but because an external system of consequences exists. We need that order to function. Our legal, commercial, and governmental systems are direct heirs to that Mesopotamian need for clear rules and predictable consequences. The idea that the law is the law and must be obeyed to maintain social peace is a direct echo of the Code of Hammurabi, but at the same time we deeply value the Israelite model. We admire people who act out of conviction, not out of fear of punishment. We believe that intention matters. We feel guilt or remorse even if no one saw us do something wrong. That is the voice of conscience that reaches us from Israel. When we talk about human rights, social justice, or caring for the environment out of moral responsibility, we are channeling the spirit of the prophets. We are saying that there are higher principles than mere written law or personal gain. We are appealing to a shared conscience. Our daily life is a constant negotiation between these two ancient forces. At work, we follow company rules, the Mesopotamian model. But in our personal lives, we aspire to be loyal, compassionate, and honest, the Israelite model. And sometimes these two worlds collide, The debate over whether a law is just or unjust is a debate between Mesopotamia and Israel. The law might be legal, the Mesopotamian model, but our conscience, the Israelite model, might tell us it's immoral. And that tension has been the driving force behind almost all great social reforms throughout history. So the voice in your head isn't just one voice. It's a dialogue, an echo of thousands of years. It's the pragmatism of a Babylonian king debating the idealism of a Jewish prophet. And understanding this is understanding ourselves in a much deeper and more complete way. The wisdom of the desert gifted us the two pillars of our ethics. It taught us that a society needs order, but also that a person needs a moral purpose. It gave us the language of rights and responsibilities, of law and grace, of crime and sin. We are not heirs to a single tradition, but to the incredibly fertile dialogue between them. Our capacity to create complex justice systems and at the same time feel deep empathy for a stranger is born from this duality. It is our legacy from the ancient Near East. So the next time you feel that pang of guilt, or you're outraged by an injustice, or you simply decide to follow a rule even if no one is watching, remember where it comes from. It's not just education or culture. It's a moral genetic code that is 4,000 years old. The desert taught us that to survive, we need rules as clear as day. But it also taught us that to truly live, we need an internal compass that points towards justice and mercy, even in the darkest night. And that is the balance we continue to seek today. We've seen how Mesopotamian laws sought external order through clear rules and consequences. The goal was a stable and predictable society where every action had a known reaction. Justice was a mathematical formula applied to the community. This system was incredibly effective for organizing large populations in complex projects. Without respect for the code's authority, the great cities, irrigation systems, and empires of Mesopotamia simply wouldn't have been possible. Order was the key to their survival and prosperity. On the other hand, Israelite wisdom, born in a more tribal and nomadic context, focused on the internal cohesion of the group. Survival didn't depend on bureaucracy, but on mutual trust and loyalty to a set of shared values embodied in their relationship with God. The idea that each individual has a direct moral responsibility was fundamental. You couldn't hide behind the law or society. Your actions, thoughts, and omissions were a personal matter between you and the divine. This fostered a strong sense of individual responsibility. Let's consider the difference in the concept of justice. For a Babylonian, justice was the correct application of the law to restore social balance. If a thief returned what was stolen and received their punishment, justice had been served. The case was closed. For an Israelite prophet, justice was much more than that. It was a continuous state of righteousness. It included caring for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Justice wasn't an event, it was a way of life. It wasn't enough not to do wrong, one had to actively seek the good for others. This tension between justice as procedure and justice as virtue remains at the core of many of our current legal and ethical debates. How much should the law focus on punishment and retribution, and how much on rehabilitation and restorative justice? Even the way we tell stories reflects this heritage. Mesopotamian epics, like that of Gilgamesh, explore man's struggle against his fate and the limits imposed by the gods. It's an external battle against uncontrollable forces. Biblical stories, on the other hand, often focus on the internal struggle of characters. Jacob's wrestling with the angel, Abraham's test of faith, King David's guilt and repentance. The real drama is what happens within the human soul. Our love for stories of anti-heroes wrestling with their own morality, for psychological dramas, and tales of redemption is a direct inheritance from the Israelite tradition that taught us to look inward, to explore the complex universe of conscience. Meanwhile, our taste for legal thrillers, detective stories that solve crimes, and narratives where order is restored in the end responds to that Mesopotamian need to see the system work, to see chaos contained by law and reason. The Mesopotamian proverb advised, "Do not choose a wife at a party." It's pragmatic advice based on observation to avoid a bad outcome. It seeks stability and order in your personal life. It's external wisdom. The book of Proverbs in the Bible, on the other hand, says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." Here, the focus is not on the outcome, but on the internal state. The source of well-being or malaise is within you. When we use apps to measure our productivity and optimize our routines, we are being Mesopotamian. We seek an external system to order our lives. When we practice meditation or go to therapy to understand our feelings, we are being Israelite. We seek internal order. This duality is not a weakness, it is our greatest strength. It allows us to build complex and stable societies, while also equipping us with the ability to question and improve them from an internal moral conviction. One without the other is incomplete. A society based solely on external law, without conscience, becomes an oppressive tyranny. Rules are followed out of fear, not conviction, and innovation and compassion wither. The system becomes more important than the people who compose it. On the other hand, a society based only on individual conscience, without external laws to structure it, can descend into chaos. If each person's morality is their sole guide, agreements become impossible, and coexistence fractures at the first difference of opinion. Our genius as a civilization has been to keep these two forces in constant dialogue, sometimes tense, sometimes harmonious. The legal code of Mesopotamia gave us the hardware for civilization. The voice of conscience from Israel gave us the software for humanity. The next time you read a news story about a new bill or a debate on ethics, remember it's nothing new. You are witnessing the latest chapter of a conversation that began millennia ago in the desert sands between scribes carving laws into clay and prophets listening to a voice in their hearts. Understanding this dual origin of our morality makes us wiser. It allows us to understand why we sometimes feel conflicted, why we long for both freedom and security, why we value the system yet admire the rebel who challenges it for a just cause. This legacy is not just history. It is a tool for navigating our present. It helps us analyze problems from two perspectives. What is the external rule and what is the internal obligation? Often the wisest solution lies in balancing both. The next time you have to make a difficult decision, try this exercise. Ask yourself, what would Hammurabi's law say about this? Meaning, what is the action that maintains order and follows the rules? And then ask yourself, what would a prophet like Isaiah say? What is the most compassionate and just action? You won't always get an easy answer. In fact, you rarely will. But by asking both questions, you'll be activating the full spectrum of your moral heritage. You'll be consciously participating in the ancient dialogue that made us human. The wisdom of Mesopotamia gave us civilization. The wisdom of Israel gave us soul. And the history of the West has been the attempt to build a home where both can prosper, a body of just laws inhabited by a spirit of compassion. That's why the voice you hear inside you is not simple, because its origin is not. It's a complex symphony, with the deep, ordered notes of law and the sharp, passionate melodies of conscience. Learning to listen to it is life's great challenge. Ultimately, the legacy of the ancient Near East is a reminder that we are not one-dimensional beings. We are creatures of order and passion, of community and individuality, of reason and faith. Our morality is a reflection of that beautiful and complex duality. So the next time you face an ethical dilemma, remember Hammurabi's stele and the hills of Judea. You are not alone in your doubt. You are part of a millennia-old conversation that seeks to answer the most fundamental question of all. How should we live together? Let's reflect a bit more on Proverbs. In Mesopotamia, many of them had a cynical or resigned tone. The poor man borrows and then he worries. It's a cold observation of reality, a lesson on how the world works, not on how it should work. In contrast, in the book of Proverbs from Israel, the tone is often hopeful and didactic. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered. There's an underlying belief that the moral universe is balanced and that good actions have good consequences. This difference is key. Mesopotamian wisdom teaches you to navigate the world as it is. Israelite wisdom inspires you to transform the world into what it should be. One gives you a map, the other gives you a compass. We need both for our journey. Let's think about the concept of the future. For the Mesopotamian mindset, the future was largely a repetition of the past, a cycle. The goal was to maintain order and stability in the face of ever-threatening chaos. It was about preservation. The prophetic mindset of Israel introduced a linear and teleological idea of time. History moved towards a goal, towards a future of justice and peace. This created a moral obligation to act in the present to help build that better future. It was about progress. Our modern society is immersed in this idea of progress, the belief that we can and should improve the world. This idea, which we take for granted, has its roots in that Israelite conception of history as a moral mission, not a simple cycle. When we speak of being on the right side of history, we are unknowingly using a concept deeply rooted in the theology of ancient Israel. We are assuming that history has a moral direction, a concept foreign to the mindset of a Babylonian scribe. Even the way we deal with failure is influenced by these two traditions. The Mesopotamian model sees failure as a consequence of a bad action or poor planning. It's an error in the system that must be corrected. The Israelite model introduces the concept of repentance and forgiveness. Failure is not just an error, it's an opportunity for moral growth. The act of acknowledging the mistake, repenting, and changing course has intrinsic value. Failure can be redemptive. Our culture is obsessed with second chances and comeback stories. This idea that one can reinvent oneself after a moral failure is a direct inheritance from the prophetic tradition, which believed in humanity's capacity to return to the right path. The Code of Hammurabi had no provisions for repentance. Punishment was mechanical and final. But in the Israelite legal system, even in its ancient forms, repentance and restitution could mitigate consequences. The change of heart was valued, so when a company publicly apologizes for a mistake, it's operating within a Mesopotamian framework, trying to restore order and public trust. But when an individual asks forgiveness from someone they've wronged, seeking genuine reconciliation, they are operating within an Israelite framework. External law protects us from others. Internal conscience protects us from ourselves. A healthy society needs both defenses. It needs citizens who respect the rules and who also aspire to be better than what the rules demand. From the clay tablets of Babylon to the scrolls of the prophets in the desert, the journey of our morality has been long and fascinating. It is the story of how we learn to balance the needs of the community with the voice of the individual. And that story hasn't ended. Every day, in our personal decisions and in our public debates, we continue to write the next chapter. We continue to try and decipher the hidden code bequeathed to us by our desert ancestors. In conclusion, the voice in our head that we call conscience is not a single melody, but a complex harmony. It is the result of a millennia-old dialogue between order and justice, between external law and internal conviction, a legacy from the desert that defines us. I hope this journey into the origins of our morality has been as fascinating for you as it was for me. Understanding where we come from gives us the tools to decide where we are going. It's the power of knowing our own intellectual history. We are not simply leaves in the wind. We are heirs to a profound debate about the meaning of a good life. And by understanding the rules of that debate, we can participate in it in a much more conscious and meaningful way. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration. Your curiosity and your time are the engine that drives this channel. If this content brings you value, that is my greatest reward. Now I'd love to hear from you. At what moments do you feel that tension between law and conscience most strongly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you don't want to miss our next journey into the secrets of the human mind, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Until next time, curious minds,